Hello, I'm Rachel from Douentza Garden in Ireland, and you are very welcome to this video which answers the question of how much do I spend on my garden and on my houseplant collection. Now, this is a question that has been asked of me several times, and the honest answer up until now was I had absolutely no idea. So I decided to keep proper records, and for a complete calendar year last year I wrote down every single amount I spent on plants, on maintenance of garden tools, on new garden tools, on petrol for the lawnmower, on everything, including the new fixtures I needed to buy for my second greenhouse, which was quite new. And I'm here today to share that information with you. So if you're interested in how much I spent on my garden and houseplant collection last year, then do stay tuned. I guess the question of how much we spend on our gardens is a bit of a loaded one, because usually it's a question that's asked of us in an accusing way, whether it's when we come out of a garden centre with a big smile on our faces and even bigger bags. But it's also something that we are reluctant to calculate ourselves. I guess there you go with the guilty conscience again. However, I have taken note of what I spent in a complete calendar year on my garden. So before I get into the detail of that, I just want to give a thank you to Jeanette from the Enthusiastic Gardener channel. If you don't know Jeanette's channel, then check it out up above. And Jeanette was the first one who gave me the idea of making this kind of video. Jeanette has done several on her own garden, and she hasn't done a complete year, but she's done several months at a time. So if you want a different idea of a different garden in a different place, then do check out Jeanette's videos. Now, my garden is quite large. It's an acre in size, which is about half a hectare. It's composed of large swathes of perennial borders. So I guess what you might term as herbaceous borders or mixed borders. There's also a heck of a lot of grass, and there are hedges. Now, the garden needs to be maintained to a certain standard because I do have groups that come to visit, and we had our very first international group last year from Sweden, so that was really exciting. And also very exciting that there's a second different Swedish group coming back to visit the garden this year. So yay, Sweden. And with accepting visitor comes a certain responsibility. So there are certain minimum standards that need to be maintained. And that is that a garden must be completely weed free, and it also must have its edges cut to a very high standard. In terms of work in the garden, it's myself and my husband who do the work. I tend to the plants and the borders. He tends to the grass and the hedging. We have occasional volunteers that come in to help, and all of that has no cost because, well, you know, I don't pay myself. So just bear that in mind when looking at the costs that I'm going to show you today. Oh, the other thing to consider is that I have recently had a second greenhouse. So I've always had the glass house, and now I have a second greenhouse. And that second greenhouse did need certain fixtures and fittings put in place. So these are additional costs that I wouldn't pay run of the mill every year, but they're included in the analysis we're going to look at now. Okay, so for the purposes of this analysis, we have 8 categories. And the first category, I suppose, is garden plants, a very obvious one, new garden plants that I've bought over the course of a year. The second category is house plants, so that would be house plants and orchids and greenhouse plants, ones that can't be planted in the garden. The third category is to do with lawn, so anything to do with lawnmower, grass, the bane of my life, that's in category 3. Then we've a category for tools, so new tools purchased. I have a category on miscellaneous, so this is stuff that doesn't fit into any other category. There's a category which incorporates potting composts or composts that I bought during the course of a year. And there's a category on fertilizers, also bought during the course of the year for either the plants in the house or in the garden. And the final category is fixtures. So that would be permanent hardware, let's just say, that I've bought last year for the garden. So that might be shelving in my new greenhouse, or it might be peony hoops to place in the garden. So those are the 8 categories. Now, the one thing that I haven't been able to measure is electricity costs. And you need to consider that my glass house is heated with electricity in the winter to a minimum of 5 degrees centigrade. That's 41 Fahrenheit. And I would have loved to be able to share with you the cost of doing that, but I have no way to measure it. And likewise, you need to consider that I currently have one grow light in the house that I grow orchids under. I originally did have 3, but we're all looking at reducing costs with the energy crisis. So I only have one in operation at the moment. So without further ado, and having said those few preambles, let's get on with the video. And the first thing I'm going to do is to have a look at month by month what I spent on what items. Here's my spreadsheet that I kept during the course of 2022 and on which I marked everything I spent on the garden. Now the values in this are marked in euros because that's the currency I use. If you're watching from the US, you can note that at the moment the euro and the US dollar are pretty much the same value. So, you know, it's easy enough for you to see what's going on here in terms of cost. Now in January, it was a lean month for the garden and I only bought 3 items. I bought some potting mix or compost. I also succumbed to the beauty of a bowl of potted narcissus tête bouclée, which is a gorgeous little miniature double daffodil that completely stole my heart. I also bought some gladiolus bulbs to plant in the garden later on. And that was it for January. In February, I invested in some chicken manure pellets as a fertilizer for the borders in the garden. Now I do make my own compost, and every year one of the jobs in spring is to spread that compost over the garden as a fertilizer to give back to the soil. But there's never enough. And I have to subsidize it with either buying something like horse manure, which I found impossible to source, or chicken manure pellets, which I now use, and I sprinkle these liberally on the borders in spring. I also bought myself a beautiful houseplant, the Douentza that you see here behind me as I talk. And this is a gorgeous, gorgeous houseplant that I'm absolutely in love with. It has done so well, and yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. I also bought myself Begonia escargot, a houseplant that I've loved and lost, and a cactus, Echinopsis, which has done quite well. I invested in a dahlia tuber, Paso Doble, which is a really lovely yellow one that I had seen and wanted, and I bought some Tigridia bulbs. Now, Tigridia is a very exotic looking plant that isn't hardy in my climate. So I bought these to plant them in the border of the glass house. And some of you may recall that greenhouse glass house tour video when I planted them in. I also bought Crocosmia Emily Mackenzie as bulbs, and Emily Mackenzie is my absolute favourite Crocosmia. Beautiful, beautiful orange flowers with darker splodges in them, and none of the invasive habit that you have come to expect from Crocosmias. And that was all I bought in February. In March, I bought tomato plants, or tomato seedlings, let's just say, to pot up in my greenhouse. And oh my goodness, these did so well last year. It was an amazingly good year for tomatoes. So delicious. I'm definitely going to be doing that again this year. And that's the great thing about having a second greenhouse, a working greenhouse. You can grow foodstuffs that are so necessary. I also bought petrol for the lawnmowers. Now, here I have to say that this is the only item really here that is a bit speculative. And I put down €10 as the cost for filling up the little canister of petrol for the lawnmower in March. It is roughly right. And I must say that I have not always kept track of this item. So sometimes my husband would go out and fill up the canister with petrol and not tell me about it. I also bought a potting bench for my new greenhouse, and this was an expensive item at €45, but something that was needed. And finally, I bought a packet of cosmos seeds, which went on to do great things in the garden. Even though I planted them quite late, they flowered beautifully and I was very pleased with them. And that was the roundup for March. April was a big month for buying things for the garden, and it started off with potting mix, 4 bags. I must tell you that I don't have any particular loyalty to a brand of potting mix. I have been experimenting with various types of non-peat based potting mixes, but I have none in particular to recommend to you yet. I bought some plants too, an unidentified euphorbia that struck my fancy at a garden centre, and at a plant sale I got my hands on 2 Masonias. These are beautiful South African bulbs that are particular love of mine at the moment. I picked up Nerine flexosus, which is a very miniature nerine, one for the pot. And there was also a spontaneous purchase of gloxinia in flower at a supermarket. I visited a plant sale in April and there was an entrance fee to that. I partook in the raffle, so bought some raffle tickets but didn't win anything. And at the sale I bought myself a trillium, which was planted in the garden, an unidentified plant for €2, and a primrose, which is called Lady Greer. Now, this is an Irish cultivar, so it came recommended, and we will see how it does over time. I also bought 2 small pots of my favourite Nepeta, Six Hills Giant, which is a very tall one and does a super job in taking the place of lavender in my part of the world. I really like this plant. And that was what I bought in April. May was also a meaty month, starting off with the purchase of potting compost and some slow release fertilizer, mostly for use on my Cypripedium orchids, the ones that are planted outdoors in the garden. I bought an unidentified Codex plant, more petrol for the lawnmower, and then a really big outlay, let's just say, because both of the lawnmowers needed to be repaired. The ride-on mower and the small handheld lawnmower needed repairs, so yeah, that had to be done. There was more petrol for lawnmowers and a purchase of soap powder to remove moss from the drive. I posted a plant to a friend. I bought myself also some greenhouse shelves. This is for the new greenhouse, so that was an expensive item of €44. I bought some plants too at a plant sale. There was a regersia, there was a primrose, there was Senecio angel wings, which promptly went and died on me in a drought that we had a little while later. There was Cicericium, EK bowls. There was a saxifrage. These are one of the shade-loving saxifrage, and this one is called Black Beauty. There was a beautiful Ito hybrid peony. that has flowered wonderfully. I also purchased a rhododendron, a kind of bush that is going to look super in my garden. I haven't actually planted that one yet. And I bought some bedding plants, which I used in pots in the garden. And that was the roundup for May. I bought a number of things in June, notably tomato food for use on the tomatoes. There was the purchase of a strimmer, which I might have categorized as tools, but I've categorized it as lawn here because it was for use in helping to get those straight lines at the edges of the lawn. I'm not sure it's really any good. I'm not very satisfied with it. But anyway, it cost $34.99. There was more petrol for lawnmowers, and I bought 10 metal peony hoops for supporting floppy plants, which you can just never have enough of. Absolutely love those. In June, I also bought paint and varnish for my project on a set of staging in the new greenhouse, whereby I renovated it, let's just say, by sticking lots and lots of plant pictures on it and then varnishing over that. There's a video about it somewhere. I bought myself a deadheading snippers and some plants, Trollius Golden Queen, some seeds for biennials, and you'll recall that video I made on sowing biennial seeds. I bought Verbena Brampton, a beautiful thing, and my grapevine for the greenhouse, Black Hamburg, and there's a video on that too. I also, and then finally, bought Alstroemeria Summer Breeze, which is a beautiful dark leafed Alstroemeria on a par with Indian Summer, the same series essentially, and I expect that to do amazing things in the garden. And that's what I bought in June. July is my birthday month, and as a result of that, I treated myself to some beautiful plants. The month started off with a cost for posting a plant to a friend. Hardly worth mentioning at €1, but you see, I'm being scrupulous about this. I also bought Salvia Hot Lips. This is one of the smaller leafed salvias that I hope will be hardy and come through the winter. And I bought the beautiful Farfugium Wavy Gravy, which I have been assured is hardy and hopefully will come through the winter. Absolutely gorgeous thing. I also bought a load of pink perennials for a border I was revamping, and you'll recall that video when I talked through each and every one of them. I haven't got them listed separately here, but the cost for those was €50. There was petrol for the lawnmower as well, of course, and that was the total for July. In August, my project for the greenhouse shelving was still underway, and there was a change of mind in terms of the paint, so I had to buy some more paint. I posted something to a friend, I can't remember what. I also got my hands on a fantastic grass that had been on my wish list for a while, and this is Stipa Ichu. Beautiful thing. Was delighted when I saw it, so of course I snapped up 2 plants. I bought some greenhouse staging as well, so this is quite an outlay. 3 staging at $29.99 each, so €30 each. And there was potting mix bought as well, and that was my total for August. In September, I didn't buy very much at all. There were just 2 plants that I picked up when I visited June Blake's garden, and one was a beautiful Monarda and the other an unnamed phlox with a gorgeous colour. It was in flower, so I could see what I was buying. And that's the total for September. In October, there was a large purchase of a chainsaw, which my husband said he needed. And that was €100, so quite an outlay. I also bought more potting compost and 2 packets of a little reticulata iris called Frozen Planet, which you saw me potting up in one of my autumn tulip and iris potting videos. More stuff to friends, and there was an ad hoc purchase of a haircut for my front hedge. Now, the hedge at the very front of the garden is really difficult to trim because it's at the top of a bank, and the outside of the hedge my husband needs to access with a ladder, and it's very difficult. So in October, the local farmer is doing the hedgerows and he's out with his machinery. So we got him to do the outside and the top of the hedge, and it was well worth €30. And it's something that we'll be doing again going forward because my husband really isn't up to the difficulty of cutting that hedge. And that was the total cost for October. In November, I bought some tulips from Farmer Gracie for potting up in pots. There was a video about that. And I also bought some coarse sand. Now, this is builder sand that I realised should have been put between the slabs in the new greenhouse, but hadn't. So I got the sand and I haven't finished that job yet. But yeah, that sand needs to go down, and it'll just make maintenance in the new greenhouse easier. You can actually sweep up the floor without everything disappearing down between the cracks. I bought some actual horticultural sand as well, the first of the year, because I had actually been using a stash I'd had from before. There had been an old cold frame in the garden which I disbanded, and in that cold frame was a lot of horticultural sand that the pots had been sunk in. So I recycled all of that and have been using it for potting for a good while now, but it ran out. So there was a purchase of a new bag of horticultural sand, and that price of €5, I have to come clean with you, I'm not actually sure that that was it. My husband bought it for me and didn't keep note of the cost, but I think it was around €5. So that was the total for November. And then finally in December, I bought a few items, mostly when I was in Madeira. So I went on holiday to Madeira with an empty suitcase because I knew full well I'd be buying lots of plants in the farmer's market there. And I did. And just recently I made a video, the very last video up here in the channel shows you all of those individual plants and me potting them up. So if you're interested in that, then you know what to check out. But that is the total of my purchases for December. So there you have it. The total amount of money I spent on my garden and on my houseplants last year was €1,502. So you're probably wondering, how much did you spend on each of those categories during the year? And I'm here to tell you that the category I spent the least amount of money on was the miscellaneous one. No surprises there. So this was a grand total of €64, roughly $64. And the next least costly category was that of potting mix and compost. So I spent the princely sum of €90 over the course of the year on various potting mixes. The next category was that of fertiliser, and I spent €130 here. The next category is tools, and the sum of €137 was spent on various tools. I then spent €151 on houseplants or greenhouse plants or orchids. It's all the same category. So I spent €208 on fixtures and fittings, and this related mostly to things I bought for my new greenhouse. And then the category that I spent the second largest amount of money on over the course of the year was garden plants. So I splurged out with a whopping €318 on various garden plants. I have learned from doing this exercise that I have spent the most money in my garden on the lawn. Yes, the lawn. Anyway, I guess that just about brings me to the end of this video on what I have spent on my garden last year and what I spend on my garden every year, I guess. And I hope you found it interesting. I would really be interested down below if anybody else has done a similar analysis, what you have spent the majority of your money on. And also, interestingly, before you did the analysis, what did you think you spent the majority of your money on? Because certainly I thought I had spent it on plants, but no, it's not the case at all. And yeah, I guess that's it for the moment. I will see you again next week. We are having 2 videos a week on this channel at the moment and going forward. And I hope you will look forward to my shorter video on Thursday, a little 3-minute one on how to do something or other outdoors, get us all back in the mood for getting out there and attacking those gardens again. And with that, I wish you happy gardening. Bye.